Hi gang, and welcome to episode 3 of the Interwoven podcast from The Weave. Now I am so excited to share with you the interviews that we've got here for you today. I have been podcasting for many years, but I can honestly say that I've never been so energized about the message and the insights we've got for you in today's episode. In this episode, we've got 3 great speakers, all from different backgrounds and areas of business, but all doing amazing things in the field of sustainability. This is going to be a bumper episode this time around because there's just so much good stuff that came from these conversations. So, let's not keep you in suspense any longer and let you know what's coming up. We start with a conversation between James Cracknell and Linda Blanchette going into detail about sustainable clothing. Then James talks to Tom West, serial entrepreneur and someone making big waves in the world of collaborative consumption, sharing and renting. Finally, we have our headline speaker. Alex O'Neill had a talk with one of, if not the biggest name in corporate sustainability, John Elkington. We were so lucky to have the opportunity to talk to him, and I think you'll agree after you hear that conversation at the end of the show. So get comfortable for a journey into sustainability and have a pen handy because you're certainly going to pick up a few tips and insights you can apply to what you're doing. So let's get started with Linda Blanchette from Consciously Clothed.
Today we're going to be talking to Linda Blanchette, who is an advocate for sustainability, somebody that we've known, and I've just spoken to Linda about this. We met sort of 3 years ago at an event or a workshop that we were putting together back in Chelmsford. So it's been a long sort of kind of career of moving her business forward, generally talking about sort of sustainability and the impact that circularity can create in our world. So I'm really delighted that we've got Linda with us today to talk a little bit about her journey and some of the insights around that. She's really a distinguished individual and has come an awful long way in that time. And I'm sure we're going to cover some real highlights in that particular journey and where she is now and ultimately, hopefully, where she wants to be within the future. So welcome, Linda. Thank you very much indeed for joining us today. First question, I just really want to kind of talk a little bit about your inspiration. So what was your inspiration for your brand Consciously Clothed? And maybe if you can explain perhaps a little bit about how your journey in that world of customer experience and various things like that you've been involved in, how that's perhaps contributed to your thinking around your business.
Well, to cut a very long story short, back in November 2019, I received an invitation from the House of Commons to take part in the UK Climate Assembly. They sent out 30,000 invitations throughout the UK. Read the invitation and thought, oh, this looks like a really fantastic opportunity. So I applied. A couple of months later, they selected 108 people to take part. And one of them was me out of 30,000 people. So I was really chuffed about that. So back in January, just before the pandemic hit, so that was January 2020, we all travelled to Birmingham to take part in the assembly. Met Sir David Attenborough, learned lots about climate change, listened to 47 speakers. It was held over 6 weekends, 3 of them being in Birmingham, but then the last 3 were online because of the pandemic. So yes, following on from that and learning about the climate crisis, that's what inspired me to start my business.
Fabulous. And in terms of that moment of realization to what do I do in my world to make something happen, was there a specific thing around fashion that really sort of ignited that sense of this is where I need to be, this is the area that I want to be working in?
We did learn about the fast fashion industry, but it wasn't specifically that. It was just everything that hit me. I actually wasn't aware of the severity of, what we're all facing now. But because I was always interested in clothes, an avid shopper, I'm embarrassed to say, I thought I can do something about that locally. I've always enjoyed clothes shopping, never visited a charity shop before I did the climate assembly, but I'm in them all the time now. So, yeah, I just thought, I could provide a personal service in my community to help women shop for quality pre-loved clothes.
Lovely. All right. So just tell me a little bit then about the business itself. So how does it work and what your aspirations are maybe for the future, and how you feel maybe some of the challenges that the business has faced and how you've overcome them as well?
Well, I've always worked in a customer service role. I've always built long-term relationships with my customers. So really wanted to provide a personal service and take the hard work out of searching for nice pieces of pre-loved clothing. And I wanted to take the shop to the customer as well, to make it a bit extra special and a bit different. So I pop up at local community centres, halls and events, taking the shop to the customer and involving the community. And it's growing and it's doing very well. I've got a lovely community of regular customers. I'm regularly asked to appear at local events, which is fantastic. So obviously more and more people are hearing about me. I'm just really chuffed about how it's going.
I came across the sort of kind of the circularity model. I did a thing called the Power MBA, an 8-9 month course about various things. It introduced me to a lot of different areas. And one of the organizations I came across was an organization called Rent the Runway, I think it is, yes, in the States. And I just wonder, is there a similarity with the way that they work and what they do? And are there areas where you feel that you offer something really quite different to that kind of model?
Well, my model is selling clothes on behalf of people. So I take the clothes off of the local ladies and keep them in stock for a couple of months and take a commission. So obviously they're earning money from their unwanted clothes. But yes, rental is something that I'm looking into, definitely coming up to the Christmas period, to offer renting out items that maybe are a bit more exclusive and expensive, that people don't really want to buy because they'll only be using them for a one-off occasion.
Yeah, and it's funny, isn't it? Because I think that does offer a huge amount of potential opportunity for kind of collaborations and various things like that. What would you say to a person who opens their wardrobe and sees a whole bank of clothing in that particular wardrobe, stuff they've not worn for months and months and months? What would you say to them that would encourage them to actually start to recognize what they, the way that they could connect to you? Pitch your business to that person who opens the wardrobe and thinks, oh my God, how many clothes have I got? I need to go off and buy some more.
I think it can be a really less complicated way of dressing if you haven't got as many clothes. You can simplify the process of getting up in the morning and deciding what to put on. If you have less items in your wardrobe, which I have now, all the unwanted clothes maybe that don't fit you or you don't love anymore, you can bring along to me and I can sell them on your behalf, obviously helping to keep them in circulation, and you earn a bit of cash, a bit of spare cash out of offloading them. And I'm happy to rehome your clothing for you and simplify your life, basically, because it is overwhelming. I've been there. I've had wardrobes full of clothes and got up in the morning, looked in the wardrobe and thought, oh, my goodness, I've got nothing to wear. But I had so much to wear, but there was just too much choice. Crazily, I was getting up in the morning and putting the same thing on. And all those clothes were sitting there in the back gathering dust.
It's such a common feature. And I'll just read this quote here because I think it's just a very passionate one, an empowering one. She says, and it comes from the Anna McCarthy Foundation from a lady called Marilyn Martinez. And it says, not only do circular business models have massive potential to become mainstream, they provide new and better growth for the fashion industry. Clothing production doubled between 2000 and 2015, while the time we use clothes fell by more than a third. That's a pretty hefty statistic, isn't it?
It is, yes.
You know, and I think if that encapsulates that kind of need really well.
If we can all just really think before we buy clothes, think about, do you really need it? Will it go with your existing wardrobe? Are you going to wear it X amount of times before you pass it on, discard it? Just being really mindful about what you're buying before you make that decision. Or maybe if you see something, sleep on it for a day or two. Don't make that purchase straight away. Have a good think about it.
What a little bit about the future of the business, and maybe some of the things that if there was a big box of asks that you could have in your business, what is the most important thing for you now to make your business reach more people? What do you need in that regard?
Well, the business is definitely growing. I've never worked so hard in all my life, and didn't imagine starting a business in my 60s, but here I am. It's so popular. I've got so many ladies wanting to rehome their clothes. I actually need another building because my home is full of all sorts. I've got 2 cabins in the garden which are overflowing. If I could have anything, I would love an additional building so that I can accommodate everyone that's interested.
Is it still just you? I know you've got a community of people who are contributing, but is it still just you operating the business and managing all of those various components?
It is, yes. After doing the climate assembly and leaving my job to start my own business, I was working 3 days a week part-time, and I thought, right, I'm going to do this 3 days a week, as I was used to doing 14 years, but it's definitely 7 days a week and very long days. I have, in the last couple of months, been thinking about getting help. I mean, I have my long-suffering husband that comes along to events with me, because it's quite a heavy manual job, loading and unloading the vehicle.
I think that there's 2 things there that kind of leap out for me. One of which is, you've got a community of people there, right? And I'm sure and it's a confidence thing, and it's a kind of what happens if people say no and that kind of, but there's always ask our community to see what they can offer in terms of support, help, volunteering, doing things like that, or, look for other resources, potentially things like internships and stuff like that could potentially get people on board to understand where the business could be. Because not only are you doing the physical work of distribution, packing, putting it all in the car, going to the places, standing there, selling, you're also doing social media and raising presence and advocating for sustainability as well. So there's a lot that you're doing in that world. And I would encourage you to definitely reach out to your community. How do you stay in contact with the community at the moment?
Well, I'm a member of some really fantastic networking groups. I do social media. That was my biggest hurdle when I set out setting up my business, because I didn't have any social media accounts before setting up the business, and I still find it a struggle, I must admit. I hand out leaflets in the community when I'm going to be popping up, advertising local magazines. That's a bit of everything, really.
It always is, and it is from our perspective as well, when we think about the Weave community and the way that we want to support it, manage it. And there's a model that we kind of think about, which is worth thinking about as well, which is we feed our communities, right? And the feed process is we facilitate our communities. And that's not just finding spaces where we can host people and put people together, but it's also about connections, it's about questions, it's about finding all of those interactions that really can make the community feel more engaged and energized. We educate the community, so there's again a clear what is it that we're really involved, that circular fashion industry, things like that. We entertain the community as well, so we ultimately sit there, and because nobody wants to be a part of a community which is just preaching at people and that's it, or just selling them stuff, because that at the end of the day, and it always irks me when people say, oh, we've got a community, and actually at the end of the day, no, you haven't. You've got just customers, and therefore, it's a whole kind of model of entertainment, and then ultimately it's finding the people that can develop that community. opportunity. And that's those influencers, those people who are also involved in that industry, who love what you do and can advocate for it. So I would encourage you to think about that potentially within your business, because I think there is a real force of people, right, that you are connected to that really could become a real engine of opportunity and growth for you within the business and take away some of that I'm doing it all myself kind of model. And I think we're all guilty of that to a degree.
Some mornings I wake up, think about the day ahead and what I want to achieve, and it gets so overwhelming, I actually end up achieving nothing. I'm very grateful to be a member of the Weave, and I just wish I had more time to devote to it and get more involved in it. So that's what I'm trying to achieve.
I'd love that. And again, I think from our perspective, it's down to us to make that as easy and engaging an experience as we possibly can, and for us to make it relevant to our audience. So that's why we use things like the Interwoven podcast to shine a light on entrepreneurial talent within the region, the people that really want to make a change to the way that the region works, and then provide that opportunity of giving back. You've got such a wealth of experiences, and like you, I'm over 60, and I didn't think at the end of the day that I was going to be starting again another business and developing that particular idea. But I can't imagine not doing anything like this in that regard. But what is it maybe, and let's spark that thing inside you that says, I really want to carry on doing this. I really want to make a difference in where we are.
Well, I do love what I'm doing. For many years, I've always wanted to have my own business, and now I've achieved that. I just want to keep going because I know it's working. I know there's so many local women that are enjoying the service that I'm providing. So there's no way I'm giving up. Just got to keep pushing on, and I'm sure everything will fall into place.
It will. And I think there's an area of building some processes into that system of yours that says where we, if there's an objective to have out of everything over the next 90 days, it would be, how do I carve time out of what we're doing, right? How do I look at the processes around where they are, and whether there are ways that I could then simplify that, whether there are things that I could do that will carve out some space. So what technologies maybe that I can use that could help me do that. And I understand from social media and all the rest of it, it's not a natural space for us, for our age group. But I think there is a space there. And I always that says, again, this is why we've just started working with a young woman called Vicky, who is a university person who was down at the startups at the university, and she did a lot of their social media work and a lot of that kind of. So we open that up and just say, please just come on board, take on the mantle of our social media. We haven't got an Instagram presence. She says we need an Instagram presence. We haven't got a Facebook presence. She says we need a Facebook presence. So, it's all of that kind of energy and engagement that needs to be fostered, that would allow us the headspace in the room to be able to actually focus on the bit that we really enjoy, which is actually having conversations with people and customers and solving people's problems. So I would definitely encourage that kind of area. And if you want any help in that process, in terms of introductions to the intern programs at the university, or how you might take it on, or how you might manage it, or what value it might provide to you, then we're very happy at the Weave to be able to offer that and support you in that process.
Thank you, James. Yes, sounds wonderful.
Yeah, we always like to sort of kind of finish with a sort of slightly personal, but not too personal, so don't worry about it too much. But what was the last book you read?
It was called Exercised. It's about the history of movement and exercise and how it has evolved over time and how important it is in our lives today, basically, to keep on the move and keep healthy.
Excellent. And is that something that you're really interested in anyway, that kind of exercise culture and keeping things, going forward like that?
It is, yeah. I've always been a gym goer and a dancer, but not so much in the last 18 months since starting my business, actually. I remember to pick that up very soon.
It's funny. It's a friend of mine. They live out in France, and just as a slight side there, but the French he's not very well, but the French health system have prescribed two things to help him. One of which is dance. So the health system have a dance society that they literally bring lots of people who suffer with a particular ailment, dementia or something like that, bring them together and then allow them to, facilitate dancing and that kind of stuff.
Amazing.
And the other one is equine facilitated learning or horses, working with horses and connecting emotionally with them. And what blows me away is it's all about keeping people out of homes, right? It's about keeping people active and keeping their minds active and the various things like that. And it's provided by the state. And I think that's just, the
Amazing.
kind of the mindset. In our health service, it's all about how do we triage, how do we get people into that? And then ultimately the destination is a home or something like that. Whereas their system is, no, we keep people at home, provide that infrastructure support. So exercise, I think, absolutely, really, really interesting and really, really important. Next question then would be last film or box set that you sat down and had a chance of enjoying?
Probably one that springs to mind is Happy Valley.
Oh, right. Yeah. Excellent.
Yeah.
With Sarah Lancashire, wasn't it? And
Yes.
yeah, really good. That
was really good. I really enjoyed that.
I think what was great about Happy Valley, apart from the fact that there was that distance between the second, I think it was the second series and then the final series, where they allowed the young boy to grow up in that period of time. So they always had the plan of letting him grow up so that when they came back to the third series, it was still the same actor. And there was that real connection. I thought that was a very, very clever piece of continuity and to keep them thinking about how things extend and making it a natural progress. And I thought absolutely, that was one of my top watches going back. Favorite band or musician?
Well, it still is, I suppose it was. George Michael.
Yeah.
Very sadly, he's not with us anymore. But,
no, great loss, absolute great loss. I Songs of the Century is one of my. It's not his most popular album by a long stretch, but there's a track on there which my mother, and she's no longer with us, but I always remember her listening to, and we listened to, and we played it at a funeral as well. But his voice was just so beautiful and such an incredible voice.
I wish I had the opportunity to go and see him, but sadly I didn't.
And final one, what would be your favorite meal to have on your birthday?
It's got to be an Indian. Curry. Yes, anytime.
Have you got
Although
a good curry?
Annoyingly, now I'm getting older, I'm suffering with acid reflux, so I do have to be careful about spicy food, but I'm not willing to give it up just yet.
Always Indian food, but with a Gaviscon to follow.
I've had a couple of bottles of Gaviscon.
All right, lovely. Well, thank you very much indeed for your time, Linda. And
thank you, James. Thank you for asking me. Thank you so much, James.
No problem. Take good care, and thank you very much for being a member of the Weave. And
thank you. Well, thank you for having me. It's a fantastic community, which I need to spend more time in, and that is my plan.
What I really love about these conversations is it's not just about asking questions, but you get some great advice from James as well. And you also got to hear more about how being part of the Weave can help you in your endeavours. To find out more about Linda and her business, just go to consciouslyclothed.co.uk. And I'm really glad to hear that Linda's going to be bringing more of her sustainable friends into the community and sharing some of the events that she's a part of. So keep an eye out for that on the community events page. Now it's time to hear from Tom West about his company, Rent My.
I'm really pleased to say that we've got one of the more dynamic, one of the more adventurous, forthright entrepreneurs of the region, Tom West, with us to discuss and talk about his journey, a little bit about his interests. And I certainly, from my perspective, I've got a real fascination with the hospitality industry as well as the sustainability market. And his current role as the founder, the chief exec of RentMy, which I'll get Tom to explain a lot about in terms of what it's going to be doing, the kind of dynamics it brings to the region, and obviously the impact it has on sustainability. So welcome, Tom. Thank you very much indeed for your time. I know you're a busy guy, so I'll crack on and just get straight into this particular interview. So first off, just very quickly, can I ask you what kind of inspired you to the life that you have now in terms of being an entrepreneur and a serial entrepreneur? Because I think you're quite right in saying you have a number of interests, not just simply RentMy, but you've had a lot of interests. And I just want to touch on some of those as well. So what's inspired you to be the sort of person you are?
I suspect it's probably the challenge. I've always been very sporting and always been very competitive. And so the challenge to succeed and drive success on my own shoulders is always something that I find fascinating. When the buck stops here, you really have to make sure that you have all your ducks in order, ready to make sure that your business is successful, that you can answer any questions about your business and cover off any information around your business at any point to any of your stakeholders, investors, employees, customers, absolutely anything. It's really important, no matter how the scale of your business, that you know your business inside out. When I was younger, a wiser entrepreneur, a little bit further down the line than myself, he turned around to me and said, learn one trade, learn it really, really well so you know it to the nth degree, and you will have learned so many other trades in the process. And I didn't realize how true that was, and actually how many bikes that enables you to ride, from retail to hospitality, from hospitality to tech, all sorts of different angles there that you can take. But there's all sorts of transferable skills that really do stack up and allow you to have good knowledge of everything, and also how to manage and work with different people.
Yeah, and I like that kind of focus on people as well and working with them, because I know that when we've spoken in the past, and it's an important facet about your personality. How would you describe your style of leadership? How would that evolve? And what do you believe that kind of style of leadership that you bring helps you achieve what you want to achieve?
It's evolved massively. As a younger person, I was very much, give me the flag, let me lead from the front, follow me, this is how we're going to do things, push, 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 push in that way. I don't think it made me a very good manager. I don't think it made me a very good leader. And as I grew and developed, I realized that actually there's other ways and better ways to achieve far better results and be a far better employer and colleague than my friends. I now lead almost from the back. I plant the seeds, I plant the ideas. I work with people to get to a destination. And I think that's probably the best way. There are times where you still need to step up and acknowledge that you need to take on a challenge of sort. There are times where you do have to grab hold of the flag and move forward, but there are times where you, more often than not, you can actually allow the team to drive and focus themselves. And sometimes you just give them the tools that they need to succeed.
It was interesting when you were talking, I think, about the hospitality industry. I think the last time we had a conversation, and you were specifically, saying how you feel that your leadership style, which has evolved, how it has helped your hospitality industry as well. So I want to touch on that, because just tell us a little bit about the background about you as the publican, you as the owner of that kind of environment. So just tell us a bit about how you got into that side of things.
After playing basketball, I came back to the area, and my parents were running a couple of small businesses, and I sort of jumped in and helped grow those businesses quite substantially into something quite scalable. And then sadly, I had my stepfather pass away. And when he passed away, I really didn't know what I wanted to do. But at the time, I didn't actually have any interest in hospitality. I had a recruitment agency that I was involved in. I had a home delivery network of grocery home deliveries back in 2009. So I was already dabbling. When he passed away, I sort of ummed and ahed about pubs, and actually I missed that connection. I missed that engagement, and the convenience store was good with engaging with customers and being community focused. But what you lacked was time to engage with individuals and talk to people. And my local pub that I grew up drinking in was on the market. I had a small amount of money and made a very silly offer. which was accepted. But I believe firmly you miss 100% of the shots you don't take, and so you sometimes just need to put a silly offer in and see what happens. That pub, really was a very small pub. It was doing about £700 a week, not a sustainable business, really struggling. And off the back of that pub, we now own 3 pubs, multi-million-pound turnover, nearly 70 odd employees during the summers, and a good sort of 50, 60 during the winter. And it's a really, really great fun business, really enjoyable. What you get in that business is problem solving, staff management, customer services, all of those things. And you have to listen to the customer side of things. One of the things that I find fascinating is there's not one person that hasn't thought, certainly in the UK, that hasn't thought, I can run a pub, I can run a bar. And everyone does think that. They get very excited about the prospect, and it's a fantastic community feature. And it's something that everyone wants to do because they want to be that part of the hub of the community. But going out and doing it, or when you are doing it, cutting through the noise, is really important. There are too many people that come into the sector that sadly listen to everyone's bit of advice. And you probably walked into a place before where it just doesn't know what it wants to be. And that's because there's no firm leadership that is saying, well, this is great, that's a great idea, this is a great idea, but this is actually us. And actually staying within that structure and making sure that you're covered within that structure is really important. You don't want to get yourself too far out of your comfort zone. You want to make sure that you have a pretty solid business model that you can keep falling back to, and you stay within that, and actually you can be very, very successful.
I mean, I kind of came from a world of nightclubs and pubs myself, so I kind of sort of understand from the point of view of the hard work and the late nights hard work and the unhealthy living conditions that it can develop and create. You spoke of community, and I think that's something which we've again touched on before. But there's this idea that the pub sits within the heart of the community, and that you make it that community asset in its own right. Is that something which that kind of need, or that area of development for being centered in your community, is that something which stays with you and is an important part of your business and your business models?
Yeah, community is massively important. I think as we strive to continue to become more efficient, and we see AI moving into the world, and we see other tech developments, autonomous cars, etc., we're going to start losing, and already have done with the sort of the sale of Royal Mail. You're going to start losing some of the stalwarts of community. So if you wanted to know what was going on within a community, you'd pop and see the landlord, you'd pop and see the postman, and you'd pop and see the taxi driver. And they knew who was seeing who, who was doing business with who, where they were, who was doing what. And that was how you found out really a lot about a community. And that is, very true. We're about to lose the taxi drivers, or have already, really, in lots of towns and cities with the emergence of Uber as people move into gigified work. Although it was a fairly gigified job previously, just wasn't formalised in that sense. And, the landlords, are they going to be the last bastion of the three? And engaging with them is really important. They're the ones that sponsor your local clubs. They're the ones that try and put on events. They sponsor so many different elements in terms of where their customer base comes from, or the way that they interact with their community. And we use to make sure we continue to use local suppliers where possible, local breweries where possible, and the results really do sort of have their worth, because you start being supplied by a local supplier. Well, guess who's going to talk about you? Them. They're going to start talking about you. You start using a local trade who is going to fit out a new kitchen or some new bedrooms. You have them on board, and they're going to talk about the job they're working on. And you engage with those people, and they become your own form of marketing without you having to do too much marketing. So word of mouth is still the strongest. And I don't believe AI will ever replace that. And so communities are still super strong. And when all these things are left, all said and done, I think there's a few things that will still be left with businesses, and that will be marketplaces. and communities like this where you can't fake, you can't generate, you can't engage in that way. You can simplify some of the processes, and I see that happening in the future where people will have automated replies to messages and emails and things like that to continue engagement and become more efficient in that way. But I can't see that really taking over on an honest level, where there's some key things. I think there'll be privacy within communities. I think it's important.
What's interesting as you were talking, I was sort of thinking, I wrote a piece in a newsletter which is about how we shop local, how we should be concentrating our supply chain into that local environment and reconnect with our local suppliers. And some of the efficiencies and the economies of scale that we achieve from a global supply chain can be offset by that connection and that close proximity that we can have with our supply chain in a local area. And I think that's really important. The other thing I was thinking of as you were talking then was how the pub is the central hub of the ecosystem of the community. And that if you can fulfill, and I know that you because in one of your pubs, the one in Manningtree, you've got a cracking relationship with the pizza institution as well. Is that right? Am I so?
Yeah. So we look at when I got there wasn't a kitchen, so we looked at working with all the local takeaways, and so we set up a dumb waiter as you walk in the pub, and there's knives, forks, napkins, menus. And we have the largest fresh menu in town because you can order from anywhere else and you can eat it on site without us having to lift a finger. All we do is we wash your plates at the end of the night. You bring them to the bar, job done. That's it. And so we can do 100 covers without having to have a chef on site. It pays us dividends. It does a great job for us, and allows us and has allowed us to grow without having to be there. But one of the things that I think is important to sort of think about is our original influencers were the landlord. Our original social network were the pub. And all we've done is move them online. And so now we go into the echo chamber of our local pub. Well, you just end up going down the local echo chamber of whatever social network you're involved in or whatever type of thing you're interested in. And you can have access to that a little bit quicker. And that's really what people want is access. And access to icons and things is but you've still got to have that within a community. So, yeah, I'm sort of heading towards a little bit about RentMy, I guess, there, but didn't mean to.
That naturally leads on to the world of RentMy. So just tell us a little bit about RentMy, just from the nascent idea of how you came about it, and then how strategically you have managed to pull all of the relevant strings together to get to this particular junction in time. I know you've got, like every business, we've got challenges, we've got hurdles to overcome, we've got various different things, but you've done an exceptional job in bringing together from a nascent idea all of this into a core brand. And I want to understand a little bit about your enthusiasm starting, how it all kind of crystallized in your mind at the start.
RentMy's journey really started in 2006. I was very young entrepreneurially and hadn't really figured out a lot of things. I bought rentmy.com, I bought a bunch of other domains, and I thought about actually, wouldn't it be great if I could rent a kayak? I was on holiday in the south of France, and I just couldn't get this idea out of my head that you could just access to something would be really useful. And being on holidays when you really want to grab hold of something. So what I want to do is have, when you arrive somewhere, have a network of all these different activities you can do. And you can have bikes, you can have kayaks, you can have tents if you want to go for a hike, etc. And these are all really nice ideas. I thought, yeah, this is great. Everyone's going to really want to get into this. And then I built the original version of it back then in 2006, 2007. And we didn't have payment solutions like we do now. We didn't have multi-directional payments. Our technology really was quite clumsy in what we had back then, and it was all very, very new, and so it got shelved. I went off and built some other products and was very successful in other ways, and then came back to it just sort of as COVID was hitting, and I started thinking about this idea a lot more, and I started doing my research on my competitors, and I realized that there's a reason that no one's really been able to create the eBay of rentals or the Amazon of rentals, where you've got one aggregated market where everyone can go to get absolutely everything. So you can rent absolutely anything. Airbnb have done a great job bringing on the sort of the peer-to-peer rental market, but even they've become a victim of their own success. And so you end up with this sort of secondary ecosystem that they've built on from the side of that. So it's things like AirDNA, which gives them all the information about property rental successes in different towns and cities. You get channel managers where people that want to be on multiple different sites, they don't just want to be on Airbnb. So they don't put their stuff on Airbnb. They put it through a channel manager that puts it on 8 different platforms or 10 different platforms. But what you don't have is one aggregator, one thing that brings everything together. So you can't rent a bike, you can't rent a kayak and accommodation, you can't rent a car to get that accommodation. And I started thinking more and more about the idea, and I started looking at the competitors, and I realized that everyone's missing insurance. So we're in the industry of trust and safety. You know, we want to make sure that everyone who wants to rent their items out, they really want to make sure that they're covered safely. And so we started going through the insurance side of things and looking at, well, we could use insurance like this, or we could use insurance like that. Finally, getting an insurer to come and have that agreement takes a long time. So we had to explain to the insurer that actually this is a really big sustainability play. And from a sustainability side of things, if we all stop buying individual items, and we talked about wastage earlier within the communities, and we talked about resource efficiency, so that we're not buying stuff and having it sit there unused. Everything we buy that is manufactured has embedded carbon within it. And if all we do is buy it, use it briefly, and then chuck it in the bin or recycle it, the embedded carbon and the embedded plastics that's generated, they're wasted. Whereas if we have items within communities that can then be shared collectively, now all of a sudden that embedded carbon gets shared. And so the cost is less per person. And we're not spending money anymore when it comes down to climate change. These government figures of we need to spend X billions or trillions on it doesn't matter. The only thing we're spending between now and day X, of when the weather really starts to change far more dramatically than it is today, is carbon. That's all we're spending. So if we can find ways to reduce our carbon emissions and our emissions in general, local is one way. If I want to get my hands on a hedge trimmer, yeah, Screwfix is a great destination for it. But if I could got one just down the road from my neighbour that I can just rent for a couple of pounds, or a reasonable amount of money depending on what it is, all of a sudden that stacks up, and it means I haven't got to now have that journey up there. It hasn't got to be shipped to me via Amazon network. We're not hiding the carbon over in China or the manufacturing. It's here. It already exists. So now we're sharing that asset and we're reducing that carbon. And so once we explain that to the insurer got on board as well, and then sort of said, well, yeah, this is a completely new product. And so we've really focused our work on not just building a platform that enables you to do so many things around rentals, but also making sure that we can now sell insurance as part of that product, so that when you rent something, you can pay for insurance and make sure you're covered against damage in case anything were to happen, because that's the first question anyone ever asks us is what if.
Yeah.
So really, really excited, and that launches in September, and that's going to be really, really exciting.
When is it launching? September?
It should be this month in September. Yeah.
Yeah, brilliant, excellent
so
stuff.
We're very excited about it.
Yeah.
At that point, I'll be able to reveal the name of the of the insurer that we've engaged with. It's taken a while to get the insurance market to realise this is the future. With the shared assets are going to be the future. So, paying for short-term car policy insurance is where this is going to lead to. It can be motorhomes, it can be small things that you just want to borrow for a weekend, scaffold tower, DIY project, that kind of thing. Or you want to try a new sport. And, I can just see you now, James, out on the Stour, just trying to go paddle boarding, trying to stand up. And yeah, I think I'll be just as successful as I am, probably. But, yeah.
A, that's hugely exciting, and B, I think that's absolutely spot on with regard to the whole kind of carbon problem that we have in terms of how we change the narrative around this as much as anything else, because I think there's a lot of greenwashing. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that gets kind of padded away and says, "Oh yeah, we're doing this, this, and this." And actually, the reality of it is that we're not doing enough. Right? The reality is that the world is heating up far quicker than we ever imagined it probably would, and we're just going down that funnel, and it's becoming more and more intolerant as we're doing it. So I think that we need to change the dynamics of our thinking. We need to change the narrative that sits around all of that. And I think you know, having businesses like yours doing that will be absolutely paramount in terms of the way that we can address this.
It's really important from that side of things, especially if you think about your car. Your car sits there for 96% of its life unused.
Yeah.
96% of its life unused. And I know that a car is a fairly high asset you're quite attached to. It's not quite as simple as just saying, well, yeah, I'll rent it out, but when I drive somewhere, I need it to be in that location so I can get back into it. Yes, it's slightly more complex than just saying that, it's only used for a certain period. But there are long periods where cars all over the country are just sat there unused. There's something like 56 million cars or something crazy like that on the roads. It's unreal in terms of the lack of use they get.
I think it brings me on to kind of one outcome that's quite interesting is that how are you measuring your impact and success in that regard? What metrics are you grabbing hold of and reporting on?
We're only doing stuff at the moment. We haven't moved on to vehicles or space yet. But we're tracking the carbon saving through exit sort of interviews of rentals. So as people rent more items, we're able to capture a better sort of collection of data to work out whether someone would have bought that asset, are going to buy the asset, a version of the asset, or whether actually just renting it for a period of time is all they needed, either to try before they bought or to just basically use it as a rental and they're happy with a rental. And as we sort of go through that process, we're able then to start calculating what carbon saving is. So, a shared ladder within a community, every house tends to have a ladder or something like that. And you just think, well, I don't need one myself. We just borrow it off the neighbour. And as soon as you stop producing them and you start sharing them, we're going to end up with that sort of ability to have those shared assets. And that can be things like trailers. The list is endless. And so then we have to build a huge database based on the carbon calculations of experts within different sectors to tell us how much carbon is embedded within the asset. And then once they've actually been rented out, what is the carbon saving? So, and how that really can be attributed to a period of time. So, that's really quite interesting stuff. And that carbon saving is really quite an interesting focus. And without getting into the realms of greenwashing that some companies do, ultimately our goal is to enable people to be able to share assets without having to continually buying items. So we would like to pair up with things like repair cafes and repair networks so that items just keep in use, being shared forever, and not having to be remade and redeveloped. And you buy quality once and that's it.
I think that is interesting, isn't it? Because there are certain brands that you associate with this. So, for instance, if you're fortunate enough to own something like a Bang & Olufsen product, it's something that you'll buy and it'll be there for pretty much the next 25 years. Whereas if you buy whatever it is, a TV off the Matsuo, it's going to get churned around and turned up, and it's all of that kind of post electrical. I always think, and I remember talking to you about this in terms of driving regional circularity from businesses' perspectives as well, because again, I always remember the story and the analogy was that I met a guy who runs a construction company, and at the every 11th month of the financial year, his accountant would tell him to go out and buy a load of virgin product just so he could reduce his tax bill and put money into capital expenditure and do all of that kind of stuff, regardless of whether he really needed the products or not. But he would just accumulate that. And then ultimately he would have machinery that was sitting on his driveway for 5 months of the year. But it was really, at the end of the day, a tax write-off. So for virtually half the year, it's never used. And for the other half, yeah, it was. Agricultural machinery was one of the ones that kind of sort of stood out for me. But again, that's seasonality as much as anything else. Everybody wants a combine harvester August to September, but nobody wants a combine harvester in February. So I guess that the issue is either you can shift it to the southern hemisphere and get a different response, or you can bring it back. But that's again creating more outcome. But anyway, it's interesting. I mean, I think it's really inspiring stuff in that regard. AI, is this a disruptive force, an additive force for good for your business, or is it something that you're having to or wanting to accommodate within the business as much as possible?
So we're already planning several AI features. We think it's really important to make sure that we're prepared. One of which is to handle the listing process. So as people go on the platform, lots of people struggle to come up with ideas on how to write creative writing of some way, shape, or form to encourage people to rent an item off of them or to share an item. So we're using AI to be able to write that listing for you. We have some other tools which we're quite excited about that potentially may hit market this year. Might have to wait till next year. But they're sort of encouragement tools. So once you integrate your calendar into RentBuy, it can obviously know when you're on holiday, so your items can't be rented when you're away. But also it might highlight when you're heading to a destination, and it might say, hey, you're heading to this location today. This is a brilliant spot to go paddleboarding. This is a brilliant spot to go kayaking. This is a great place to go for a hike. Did you want to borrow a tent? Did you want to rent a tent? And so there's lots of opportunity there for AI to be an added salesman in a way.
Yeah.
And so you've got lots of functionality that it can be within that. It can also have a degree of personality. Some of the customer service roles and be there to support. It can do things like that, but I'm reluctant to let it go all out as I'm not convinced yet. I also think it's quite important that we still have a degree of human interaction with that throughout the product. If we were just to leave it to AI, I think it would be quite clinical, and I don't think that that's always needed. There needs to be a sort of a human element.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think I was listening to a Harvard Business Review podcast yesterday, and they were talking about within the world of medium-sized enterprises that 16% of them have almost put a complete ban on AI until it's at such time somebody within the C-suites or whatever can actually truly understand exactly what it is. And also they got to this point where they're actually saying to the the instigators of AI, the coders within that world, they're saying to them, I don't mind we're using it, but don't want our stuff in there. So in other words, I don't want the echo chamber of going into AI where it's actually basically scraping data from yourself as well as your competitors. And it's kind of distorting that whole area. So I think there are lots of challenges, but what I keep saying to me, I was speaking to somebody this morning, and I was saying it's where AI comes in to improve efficiencies within what you're doing. And if you can treat it as that efficiency builder within your business, it can take over some of the more mundane operations and more first instigation of contact, maybe with your clients or customers, so long as it's intuitive enough to be able to cope with that. Because there's nothing more frustrating than sitting on a bot that says, have I helped you or not? And you go, no. Oh, could you like to re-ask the question again? And you go, oh, not really. No, just put me in front of a human. So there you go.
You've hit the nail on the head there in terms of a bot and AI are quite clearly becoming two different things. And we've had all these pre-filled questions, and basically it's asking you, can you answer the question in a format I'm familiar with, rather than can I figure out what you're actually asking me and how to ask me is more of its focus. So I think from an AI point of view within different markets or different things, I think one of the things I found quite interesting was the early days when Samsung were using chat to basically check its code and check its software. And they found that they were doing a great job on Chat 3.0, and it was doing really, really well. And then they realized that Chat was basically just learning the entire system. And so the next set of updates that it will run will include all of the software, and they've just given away all their software. and it knows all the solutions, and it's worked out how those problems can occur, and all these things. So you're inevitably going to have AI understand things a lot quicker, interrogate data a lot faster. But it's up to us to know how to use that information. It's not AI is never going to be at that point where it's going to have a purpose to really understand how to use it, and it's for us to make sure that we end up using it in the right way and for good.
Yeah, and absolutely, and for good is the other side of it as well. I've yet to say to an AI piece of generative AI chat or whatever, and just go, write me a blog, because it's inevitably it's a load of old tosh, or it's just very uninteresting and not that kind of informative. But okay, all right. So if you, in reflection upon where you've been and where you've come from over the last, well, really since, sort of the early 2000s and where you are, can you sort of kind of grab a moment of proudness that you feel that you've achieved something in your life that said, this is something I'm really, really proud of, and it's something I'm really, I would be willing to talk about and share, or whatever, just that moment of pride in your life?
I've had some really big moments in business. I've been quite successful in different areas, and I'm very, very lucky to have worked with board members from companies like Tesco, Waitrose, when I was doing home delivery stuff, IBM, when I'm doing tech stuff. I've lived in the US and worked in California, north and south, saw a successful exit out of a company out there, and all sorts of things. My real success, the one that I really think about, is it's around the Christmas event for the pubs. Seeing people enjoy themselves coming in. One of my favourite things, I guess, was the seed that I started planting when I started back at doing, I call it retirement, but back when I started in the hospitality side of things. We were always so busy in the pub, and we never had enough tables. So I would introduce people to each other, and I would always use an icebreaker. So we wouldn't have enough tables. There'd be a couple sitting on the table for 2 or 5 or 10 people, and I'd just been taking up all the space. And then a group would walk in that want to sit down, and you're like, well, they're about to walk out unless I grab hold of them and say, hey, come on, that's all right, I'll introduce you to these guys, you guys can sit together. That's how you build a community. And I did that for a longer period. And now I look at a lot of those relationships and those things that are founded, and people come up to me and they still say to me, we met because you introduced us. And when we were introduced, you turned around and went, this is Mark, he's just been bitten by a shark. And this is Claire. Her ambition is to be the first woman in space, to play dominoes. And it's just it's crazy. I used to make stuff up like that all the time, and it just broke all the ice, and they'd have those introductions. And now I look at it, it's built a community. There's so many people that still come back into that. And I go down to the tug of war on the front, any of the community events here, and I do really reflect quite proudly on that. And people do come to the entry and they say, I moved here because of this pub, I moved here because of the community. And I think as I build Rentmire, I want that to be the same thing. I want that to be, you introduced us to people, you enabled us to do something, you enabled us to achieve something. It was quite nice. The first rental wasn't anything spectacular. It was a little remote control boat, and they're quite the sort of thing that you put on the water. And if you get them in, it's not got a motor; it's a sailing boat. So if you point it in the wrong direction and the wind takes it, that's gone. It's on its way to Holland over here. So you have to have a degree of trust. And what happened was the person who owned it and the person who rented it, they didn't know each other, but they became friends through the rental, and they became friends with the son who actually was really who they rented it for. And they encouraged that use of actually how to sail, and it's something that is lasting. And I think that access to items that people otherwise wouldn't have access to, I think that's what really does inspire that side of things to me. And then, the relationship it builds within community is then so much more powerful. And I think that's where it really can be powerful, and really could have something within that. So I'm very, very proud for that sort of community element and everything we've achieved from those kind of community elements. And that beats any award. It beats anything like that. It's people enjoy themselves.
Yeah, no, it's pretty amazing. It's great. All right, okay. Final, just quick fire round, just to give us a flavour of your kind of you know who you are. Your favourite band or musician?
Oh, blimey. I like a lot of things, but Johnny Cash is pretty much popular. Yeah.
Okay. Favourite or the last favourite film that you saw?
In terms of great films that I like to go back to, for me, I'm a Sopranos guy. So it's not so much a film; it's a TV show. I'm a Sopranos guy, and I love Tony Soprano. When James Gandolfini passed away, I was so upset because I was so hoping they would do a follow-up or another series, and I just think that was the birth of real big TV.
It was a groundbreaker, wasn't it? It was absolutely HBO groundbreaker, kind of sort of bust its way through. Sort of, it was an amazing series. Favorite meal on your birthday?
Simple spaghetti carbonara.
Oh. Very nice too. And finally, sort of last book that you read that you really sort of chimed with you.
Oh, Jordan. Autobiography of Jordan. Yeah. Any of the MJ stuff. Michael Jordan's autobiography. Did you watch the Nike film? Was it Nike Air or the? Yeah. I've seen quite a lot about that man. He's a pretty switched on cookie. It leads on to a whole bunch of the questions, and we almost touched on it earlier around taxation. We want to see change, and the moment we start seeing those changes, that's when we start to see a changed world and a better planet. You
can't have different parts of the system going off at different areas. You can't have the government focused on growth, financial, GDP, that kind of stuff, when in reality, you need something which actually encompasses everything within that environment. So I think there's a lot of challenges, but I do believe that having these conversations and having people making a difference in the real world and what they're doing, I think that's where it has to start, but it has to gain momentum rapidly, because otherwise we're going to lose our way. Final bit, where can people find you? So tell us a bit about just the names of the pubs that you run or that you're involved with, and then ultimately where can people find out about Rent My?
You'll find me in the Rent My office. I'm always working. But if you do fancy a pub, we're jolly good pubs. We have the Red Lion in Manningtree, the Lord Nelson in Ipswich, and the Marlborough in Dedham. Always feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or hit me up on email with tom@rentmy.com. And if you just want to shoot the stuff and have a good old chat about business, I'm always available. And anything I can do to help any of my fellow entrepreneurs or colleagues in business, please feel free to reach out, and I'll be there to support in any way I can.
Well, we'll share the website details and everything else like that, and your LinkedIn profile on the podcast as we do it. You're always welcome. Thanks very much indeed for the last conversation. It's been phenomenal, and hopefully we'll have another one shortly, and hopefully we'll have it over a pint of beer, which would be nice. So
we should definitely do that podcast, Jake.
Yeah.
That's what we should do. No, thank you very much for having me. Thank you very much for inviting me and thinking of me. And I look forward to that next shared pint.
Absolutely.
So slight apologies for some of the sound problems there, but hopefully you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. Not only is Tom providing people with things that they need and that they don't really want to buy, but he's also taking his love for a strong community and growing that in a sustainable way. Really excited to see the full launch of Rent My happening soon. Now, we are in for a real treat. Settle in for a conversation between Alex O'Neill and world-renowned authority on sustainability, Mr. John Elkington.
So, welcome to the Interwoven podcast, John. Very, very lovely to have you here indeed.
Alex, I'm delighted to be part of this, whatever it proves to be.
So, we've invited you onto this podcast today, John, because of your extensive work in the corporate world around sustainability, and that's something that we're really keen to promote and to support within the Weave community. So tell me a little bit about how you got started in this world.
Brought up traveling with an Air Force father, and so saw a fair amount of the world before I was 9, 10. during that period, we lived in Northern Ireland for a number of years on a farm that was very archaic, full of wildlife, and I got exposed very early to things like tens of thousands of eels and so on a dark, moonless night. And somehow that sort of put me onto an environmental track. And then through all sorts of incidents and excursions, in the early 70s, I did a postgraduate degree at UCL in city planning and decided at the end of that, the last thing I wanted to do was to be a city planner. And then came out and worked with business on these sorts of issues at a time when two things were actually true. One was that most environmentalists hated business, didn't trust it, thought it was the great Satan, to use a later term. But secondly, where it was almost impossible in the early days to get into business at all. I mean, they saw anyone interested in environment and these sorts of issues as a proto-communist. I mean, later on it became the watermelon picture, sort of green on the outside, red on the inside. But so part of my initial challenge was sort of almost to be a Trojan horse into the business world.
So you kind of had to break down that barrier in a way.
Well, I was very lucky because I set up a company with three other people in 1978 called Environmental Data Services with two people. And one of them was one of the founders of the World Wildlife Fund, Max Nicholson. So he was already in his 70s and really well respected in the sort of the environmental and conservation world, but also knew a lot of people in business. And then the other one was David Layton, who ran something called Incomes Data Services, and they were the parent company. And so I had these two heavyweights behind the work that I was beginning to do. But even so, it took 9 months to get into the first company. I mean, you simply could not get through the front gate, let alone through the front door. But once I got onto the first one, which was a company called Albright and Wilson, the doors opened and in very short order, within 18 months, for example, I was being asked to write or help to write the first written environmental policy statement for companies like BP and ICI before they disappeared and so on. So, yeah, timing I always feel is enormously important in all of this. And I always feel incredibly lucky that I've been able to detect a number of sort of building ways and then get out my surfboard and ride them.
What do you feel caused that change? So going from not being able to even access a company to suddenly all companies wanting to be on board?
All these things take not just months and years, they take decades and in some cases generations. And one of the things that I learned before I came to Essex University at school was I read a book called The Structure of Scientific Revolutions back in 1962 or 63. I think I was 14 at the time. And one of the things that book taught me was that there are these things called paradigms, and paradigms shift, but they take a couple of generations to crank from one view of the world to another, and it's pretty nauseating for those trapped in the old paradigm when the new one comes through. And just a second lesson I learned was that I recently went around the house looking for the book, and I found that I had 5 separate copies of the book because I kept buying.
Obviously, a good one then.
Well, it's a lousy read in the sense that it's not well written, but the thinking behind it was sort of revolutionary in a way. And what he said also was that in the later stages of a paradigm shift, when nothing seems to have been happening for a very long time, you suddenly get these inflection points where things happen in very short order.
All of a sudden. Yeah.
And I think that's pretty much where we are on all of this. So to your question, that paradigm had started to shift with the work of people like James Lovelock, which fed into Rachel Carson's book, Silent Spring. It was driven in the United States by the first Earth Day in 1970, where something like 10% of Americans, over 20 million people, came out into the streets in protest on environmental issues. So there was this, and that led to a whole raft of new legislation in the US, the establishment of the Environmental Protection Agency, and then everyone else, initially Scandinavia, parts of Europe, Japan, and so on, were scrambling to catch up. So And there were some really, really powerful campaigning groups, which I worked very closely with, Friends of the Earth, Greenpeace, Oxfam, people like these. Mm-hmm. And we forget that now, how important they were in driving that shift, or at least the earliest stages of that shift.
And now it must look like a very different landscape altogether.
Well, you have to be very careful of thinking that just because people talk the language, and when we set up a company called Sustainability in 1987, we spent the first 3 to 4 years quite literally spelling the word for people. They'd never heard it. And in fact, we found there was only one prior reference to the word back in 1973. A French-Canadian priest had used it. And it wasn't even referenced in the Brundtland Commission report. So it was a novel term. Now, I mean, every conversation I'm part of, it's like younger people is the every third or fourth word now. If you're in business, every third or fourth word is sustainability. And my wife and I, who very kindly just gave me a cup of coffee, but and she was at Essex too, leaving just as I arrived. But we went to the Chelsea Flower Show a few weeks back. We were invited by the Royal Horticultural Society. And sustainability is shot through everything they do. And there was one moment when I thought, oh my God, if I hear this word one more time, I'm going to blow up. And so to your question, Alex, I think you get to the point where everyone feels that they need to talk the language. But the question is, are they really behind the scenes doing what would actually be required to shift this system of ours to true sustainability? And I think that process is underway. But the crisis is going to get very much worse, very much quicker than we're used to. And so within sort of 3 to 5 years, I think we will be looking back on a transformed landscape in many ways. I can explain why I think that's true, but I think it is true.
I mean, I'm interested to know. I sort of feel the same way. I have absolutely no basis as to why I feel that way. Maybe it's just been the growing momentum over the last few years. But
I think intuition is a really important skill, and I think we all know it in our bones. I think ordinary people around the world, but particularly in this country, just increasingly, they see the flooding, they see the summer droughts, they feel the rising temperatures. They know that the world that they've grown up in is not going to be with us for very long. So, I mean, and a lot of that is intuitive, and yet they're still very skeptical about the scientific evidence and so on, partly because they're scientifically, and don't misunderstand me, this isn't arrogant, but they're illiterate. And I gave up science when I was 14 because I refused to cut up frogs in biology lessons, and they were still living frogs at that stage. And because of that, I couldn't study chemistry, I couldn't study physics, any of that sort of stuff. And many years later, I came back and wrote for 5 years for New Scientist. And actually, that was a hugely valuable qualification that I hadn't studied science, so I didn't make assumptions. And I was really trying to understand things from the basic steps. But most people, most of the time, are scientifically illiterate. They may like a particular television program on wildlife or what, a Spring Watch or whatever it is, but the deep understanding of what scientists are now increasingly desperate to tell us is something that they sadly don't yet share. And that problem is shared with politicians, political leaders. They're clueless very often and very keen to get onto something a little bit more entertaining. And that's not just Boris Johnson, than climate change.
One of the interesting things that I've observed about climate change is a lot of the discussions are very negative. They feel very threatening and very scary. But your book, Green Swans, is actually quite an optimistic perspective. And you've described yourself as an optimist before. So how does that play into it?
Well, I don't think you could do what people like us do if you were not an optimist in the sense that you believe progress was at least possible and therefore worth pushing towards. And the model that I have is that Thomas Kuhn's sort of paradigm shift model, which is one that suggests that it takes a couple of generations for a really radical new mindset to sort of embed itself in populations, because as scientists have often said, you need the generation most infected with the old paradigm to die, and you want then the ones who they taught to either die or retire, and then younger people come through who see the world differently. It's in their very nature. So I am an optimist, and I do see a lot of progress. But to your point about scary, I mean, I did my first report on climate change back in 1978 for a man called Herman Kahn, who was known as one of the architects of the mutually assured destruction nuclear weapons strategy in the United States, who's also one of three models for the main character in Dr. Strangelove, the Peter Sellers film a long time ago. And, you know, at the time, he couldn't get his brain around what I was saying, which is that climate chaos is going to be a real factor in the early part of the 21st century. And I think that was typical. I mean, very bright people just could not see what was staring a younger generation in the face. Mm-hmm. And then just finally, I think to the fear, 20 years ago with my wife, I went to the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution on Cape Cod in the United States, and was invited by the director, just the two of us, to go around, spend a full day with talking to their scientists. So I thought I knew where climate change was taking us. And I literally walked out with my knees knocking, with absolute sheer fright at what they had shared. And it's only just now coming through. I mean, so we scientists knew it then. And you've just seen in the last 2 or 3 days, two diagrams that are now flashing around the world. One is the North Atlantic sea surface temperature anomaly, where if you look at the trends to date, they're all pretty much in a band. And then suddenly there's an excursion where this year is just going berserk. And then if you look at the Antarctic and you look at sea ice and the indicator there's an anomaly there. And so you got the band of the what's happened previously, which some fairly wild excursions along the way. But with this one, it's suddenly plummeting. That's why I say I think we have overshot planetary boundaries that are going to be profound consequences. They're going to be locked in for hundreds of years. And it's very hard not to sound like an Old Testament prophet in all of this. But that is because of the idiocy of our politicians and the inability of our scientists, particularly our climate scientists, to get their message through, to persuade people to act and act in good time. So we're in a period of overshoot. The consequences will be profound. But at the same time, the growth opportunities and so on will also be quite remarkable. So it's not all bad news.
Thank you for ending on that optimistic note.
One has to.
So how is the work that you're doing now contributing to bringing new ideas, new optimism to organisations?
No, God knows. I mean, in the sense that we were Britain's first B corporation. So B corporations are chartered, in effect, around something I launched back in 1994, the triple bottom line, people, planet, and profit. There are over 6,000 of those companies now around the world, and something like 1,300 of them in the UK. Well, we were the first in the UK, and we incubated the B Corp movement for much of its first year. And one of the things that you're meant to do as a B Corp is produce an annual impact report. Well, we haven't. We've done internal notes to ourselves. We've never produced an impact report to explain what we think we're doing, what people would call our theory of change, and what sort of negative impacts that we have. So when you mentioned kindly the Green Swans book, that was my 20th book, but that one uniquely had gold, sort of greenish foil on the cover. And when we did our climate calculations about 18 months ago, we found that apart from air travel, our biggest impact, negative impact in terms of carbon emissions that year was that foil cover on that book.
Wow.
And we had no idea when we asked the printers in America to do it, that just opting for that particular cover, which I thought was beautiful actually, but I mean, this was quite engaging. But so to your question, how do we sort of know we're having an impact? Well, one very basic indicator has to be whether people show an interest in what we do. And during the lockdowns, when COVID hit, I had been traveling constantly for well over 40 years. I have a it's a matter of shame now, but I have a gold card with British Airways for life because I just traveled so much. But everything changed, as you'll remember, and we suddenly had not this situation where we couldn't travel. And what happened to me in that next 2 years was I did over 350 keynotes, I mean properly keynotes, in over 35 countries, because suddenly I could do 3 or 4 in a day because it was virtually like this. And eventually my team, and particularly our CEO, Louise, said, look, you've become a hamster on a wheel. Let's just sort of drag you off that. And thank God I was able to get off it. But I mean, there was so much interest in Green Swans and that sort of thinking that drove a lot of that. A lot of our understanding of whatever impact we might be having is anecdotal, in the sense that we don't do regular scientific surveys. We don't sort of even poll, because the main part of our work and the main thing that we get paid for is working with businesses in different parts of the world to get their brains around this and develop their strategies and evolve their business models and so on. And they routinely tell us nice things. Well, they wouldn't probably work with us but we're very peculiar because we're not a typical consultancy at Valence. We're basically candid friends, as Max Nicholson once described it. We tell people what they don't want to hear. And most of them continue to pay us for that nonetheless. But we're trying to channel the future into the present in boardrooms and elsewhere. And the way I put it when I was at the prior company, Sustainability, over 15 years ago, was that we're objective and we try to be professional, but we're not neutral. We're never neutral. We hope to be neutral in about 10 to 15 years, in the sense that we're trying to bring that really quite exciting in some cases and uncomfortable in other cases future into today's decision-making processes. And that's a very peculiar role, and it's one that we find challenging. And one of the things I've learned to do over time is just to use a certain amount of humor. I can come back to that, but we try not to be absolutely missionary in what we do. We try to be slightly playful, because if you can be a little bit more playful, you can tap into creativity, which if you're missionary, people just go into the defensive crouch.
Do you find that some organisations, in the same way that some people, don't really believe you? Like if you're bringing in 15 years in the future knowledge, science, prediction, etc., into the current sort of day, do you find that there's a bit of a resistance there?
Well, less now than there was, because now you've got almost every day of every week of every month of every year, you've got the news media spilling over with the latest reports on fires and dry. Look at New York. I mean, Martian skies over that city because of the Canadian fires, and that's climate change. But it's also Canadian idiocy, and I love Canada and I love Canadians, and I have a Canadian son-in-law and all the rest of it. But they have planted lodgepole pine where lodgepole pine should not be, and lodgepole pine burns very readily, whereas the old sort of diverse forest mix didn't burn nearly so fast. So that's why I say, firstly, the climate and biodiversity agendas are becoming much more imminent, but with the disruptive implications of that are very difficult for most people to get their brains around, particularly if they're operating in the sectors that are going to be most challenged. So, for example, if you're in coal or you're in oil or you're in natural gas, this is really bad news. I mean, even natural gas, because of the methane leaks from that industry. So to your question, I've sometimes described myself as a jester, in the sense that if you think back to the medieval courts, the jester could often say things and get away with largely his head on his shoulders still, because that was his appointed role. And I've often felt that I'm somewhat in that role of because people, they invite me in because they know there's something interesting there. They don't always know what to expect, and it's not always the CEO or people like that who invite us in. It's people who feel it would be good for them to hear some of this stuff. So the skepticism is less than it was, but actually I think it's going to get much worse, because I think now that people are waking up to the fact that they're going to lose not just millions, not just billions, but trillions of euros or dollars or whatever, because of their sunk assets are going to be overwhelmed by a set of changes they don't properly understand. They don't want to understand that, and so you get denial in so many different ways. There are perfectly intelligent people who, in their mind, know this is coming, but in a way they're going to make their next billion. They're going to buy their bunker in Patagonia or New Zealand and just retreat from it all. I'm not joking when I say that. I think that there are very wealthy, high net worth individuals now and families who are buying up property in South America and in New Zealand, to the point where the New Zealanders are now saying enough, because they know what's coming. They can see it. So yeah, there are skeptics out there, but if they're there, I want them to say what it is that they don't believe, and then I want to get into a conversation with them as to why they don't believe it. I would ask them, for example, have you been to the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution? Have you talked to the scientists who are doing this work? And if not, you don't have a right to disbelieve if the consequences of what you're now doing and continuing to do are going to distress and in some cases kill tens of millions of people around the world. You don't have that right, or you shouldn't.
Yeah, and actually it's really interesting that you talk about that on a scale of sort of large company CEOs, because I think it's the same phenomenon that you see just for individuals, where mentally they can look at the situation and go, there's something wrong here and I need to make changes. But when it comes to your habits and your day to day and what you've been used to and how you've worked or run or whatever over or lived your whole life, it's actually very difficult to make those changes.
Well, I think it's really, really difficult. And one of the ways that we tried to lower the threshold for people back in the late 80s with a colleague, Julia Hales, who I'd set up sustainability with, and she'd wandered into my office at the age of about 22 at the time. I must have been 40 or something. But we did this book, which was very different, the outcome from what it would have been if I'd simply sat down and written a book on environmental issues. I'd come up with this term, green consumer. And the idea was that this would be the Green Consumer Guide. And in the end, it sold over 1 million copies in 20 foreign language editions and so on. It was an absolute phenomenon. But it made the issues accessible by saying, here's a potted summary. Even then, in the late 80s, talking about climate change and at that time, things like the ozone hole and so on. These are the issues. These are some of the product choices you're going to be making. And let's go into a supermarket and think about the different categories of product that you might want to buy. You'll then see brands. And so what is the stance of these different brands on the sort of issues that we feel that they should be interested in or concerned about? And then what are the companies behind those brands, because most people have no clue as who owns the brands, who makes the ultimate decisions. What are they doing? What's their footprint look like? I genuinely thought, I had my own consultancy at that time, I thought we would lose every client that we had. It only took 3 weeks, but when the book first came out in the UK, we suddenly found ourselves literally overwhelmed with companies wanting to work with us because we had talked about brand. And a friend at Greenpeace about 30 years ago, they started targeting brands. And what he said was, discovering the power of engaging companies at the brand level was like discovering gunpowder. Explosive potential. So we suddenly found that we had companies like Unilever and Procter & Gamble literally squabbling as to who would work with us. Because we were so small, we wouldn't do what big consultancies described as Chinese walls. We'd be all in with a particular client. But that was completely unexpected, and it was very successful indeed for about 3 or 4 years. In the sense that people woke up, they wanted to do stuff, and then the weakest side of what we'd done was that we didn't have any clear way other than doing later books, because the internet did not exist then, so there was no way of regularly and readily feeding back to people. And if people are taking complicated decisions, they want some signal back as to what's happened as a result. We weren't able to give them that. And government certainly didn't want to do that, and the supermarkets didn't either.
Did they not see that in the change in the way that their consumers engaged with them, though?
They were fearful because they were hit on so many issues simultaneously, and every time they managed to resolve one set of issues, another set of issues came up. And I remember going in to see a colleague at Marks and Spencer quite some years after the book, The Green Consumer Guide, came out. And we'd followed it up with a number of other books, one of which focused entirely on supermarkets. And we sent around, I say we're not scientific, but I mean, we do research. And we sent around a questionnaire to all the major supermarkets. The questionnaire was 99 pages long, with, all of the questions, the choices. And when I went to see this person at Marks and Spencer, probably 5 or 6 years afterwards, after the first book came out, he opened his top drawer and he said, I still have your questionnaire in my top drawer because I still go back to it to see that happened. Well, what are the things that you were flagging up that still hadn't? So some supermarkets were comfortable with that. But most weren't. Most just thought, oh, for God's sake, let's get back to something that we know how to manage, like price, quality, availability, these sorts of things.
Yeah. It's interesting, actually, because something that I've noticed is that obviously a lot of brands now are starting to market their products specifically as being sustainable, but not as many as I'd think. I thought it would catch on an awful lot quicker. Like, there's a particular brand that I purchase, and they actually, on the side of their cartons of oat milk, it
wouldn't be Oatly.
It would be Oatly. Not allowed. I'm not sure if I'm supposed to promote on here, but I do. And they actually put like how much carbon their product, the carbon footprint of their product, and I am quite surprised that there aren't a lot of other places following suit quicker. I'm sure there are some, but
I think one of the things that's happened recently, and it happened back in the late 80s, early 90s as well, is a growing concern that where companies do make claims and brands do make claims and declarations and all the rest of it, it does constitute greenwashing or ESG washing or whatever it is. I mean, you may well know that the European Commission now is stripping ESG or environment, social and governance branding of billions of euros worth of investment funds. And so there's now almost there's this counter trend of green hushing where companies and brands are worried that if they say anything, they're going to get targeted. And so they prefer not to. But I mean, I know, well, it may be that we're not allowed to talk about brands, but I do. I mean, that's what I do. And I talk about companies behind them. We sign non-disclosure agreements with companies, but I routinely ignore them. Because in a way, we don't represent anyone. And very often, the businesses we work with see us as representing the future. I mean, one of the tags that's been applied to me is ambassador from the future. But I'm constantly saying, don't rely on us to tell you what Extinction Rebellion or whatever are thinking. Talk to them. But if you want our judgment of what they're currently saying and where that might go, we're happy to share that. But we'd recommend you talk to the activists and campaigners themselves. So I'm not surprised that it hasn't taken off more rapidly. But I think this time it's going to prove a bit stickier in the sense that it won't, after 4 or 5 years, blow away in the wind, but people will increasingly want to talk about those sides of what they do, where they're confident about what they're doing. And I think Oatly just did an impact report, which was more like an expanded press release, but it was one of the funniest examples of that sort of reporting that I've ever seen, because it accepted every fault that they'd ever been accused of and just flagged that up in the spotlight. And I just thought that was great, because it in a sense, we're all human. We all make mistakes. And I've often said, I don't mind companies greenwashing once, but if they do it twice or 3 times, you've got to come down on them like the proverbial metric ton of bricks.
In our community, we have a number of businesses, small, medium, and a lot of them are keen to be sustainable. Some are looking towards working towards a B Corp as well, becoming a B Corp. What advice would you give them? Have you got like a top 3 or something, key things to focus on?
Well, just a bit of history. I mean, I've largely worked with bigger companies, including some of the world's biggest companies, for a very long time. And I've often been beaten up by people who say, well, why don't you work with small and medium-sized enterprises? Because they constitute, 90% or whatever the number is of our economy or whatever. And, very high slice of employment and all the rest of it. And my answer has been, if you can change the thinking and the specifications from the very big players. We worked, for example, for many years with Ford in the United States. And, then I think it was either 9,000 or 14,000 was just the number of their biggest suppliers. If you can change the central purchasing requirements, you can cascade that through. But now I think small and medium-sized enterprises are enormously important. One of the things that we've been doing in recent years is working with the Houses of Parliament, particularly the House of Commons, working with their all-party parliamentary group on fair business banking. And we've set up a platform where one of my colleagues is now still on the board, our CEO, called Bankers for Net Zero. And I would recommend any small and medium-sized enterprise that is looking to engage with this world, particularly with the net zero agenda, to look at what Bankers for Net Zero is doing, because that's the retail banks, that's the people who put money into SMEs, thinking about how they best support that sort of action. There are many, there are groups like Business in the Community still, I'm sure there are all sorts of government and regional government bodies and platforms that do this. I'm sure the CBI and the Institute of Directors are better than they used to be, although we all know the CBI is a little bit distracted at the moment. One of the benefits of the B Corp thing is that you do find yourself in a network of people who are like-minded. They may be in different sectors, but you will find people who are in your same sector, and they're very open to sharing what they're doing. So if you want to come up this learning curve very rapidly, it's not trivial to do the assessment to sort of get sort of certified as a B corporation. But in my view, it's well worth the effort if either you as the founder or owner or as the managing director or some part of your senior team is prepared to get involved and be part of the discussions and building activity and momentum and the agenda in that sort of space. The other thing is just, it's something I've done throughout my life, which is just get in touch with people. Just ask people through LinkedIn, for example, if there are people you hear of who are doing interesting work, send them a note. Many will say no, but a surprising number will actually engage. And I personally find that a wonderful way, that and Twitter, despite Elon Musk's shenanigans. I find those forms of social media incredibly helpful, and you can tune them to some degree to what you need to know. And the other just final thing is that, final here, not because in any sense final in a sense of a list of bullet points or whatever, but if you look at the business media now, I've read the Financial Times every day as a newspaper when I'm in the country for 35, 40 years. It covers every day now something like 10 to 12 stories that are relevant to the agenda that we're talking about. It's been a profound sea change. And when Extinction Rebellion surfaced, and I wrote a letter to the Times, got 20 CEOs of companies, most of them green companies, but with Unilever among the bigger ones there. One result of that was that a number of us founded a group called Business Declares. And this was Business Declares a Climate Emergency. And the Financial Times is now part of that Business Declares platform and gives it free space. And so things are changing. And I think very often we assume we're going to find it difficult to find stuff out there. I don't think that's the difficulty now. I think that the difficulty is trying to, out of the welter of the stuff that you will hear and see and learn, what should you really be paying serious attention to, and what should your priorities be?
Absolutely. I think there's so much information out there. And that's great. I think it's so interesting how that has changed and how much guidance you can get now.
Alex, there's one other thing, which, although I said that was the final thing, if I may, which I think is relevant.
It's a final thing.
Well, it's because, exactly, but it's because of the University of Essex context here, and Essex has a business school of its own, and one of the things I think is sadly true is that universities and business schools, always with honourable exceptions, have been profound laggards in this space. They've been so slow to wake up to the potential and serve their students properly, including their MBA students. Now, that is changing, and I think we see a growing amount of competition between the leading business schools, and we're working with quite a number of them now to help them change their curriculums and so on. I'm visiting professor at 3 of these things now, and so they're trying to bring in the outside world. So if you went, and this is to your SME folk, if you went to a university at any stage, or you went to some other form of college, or you went to a business school, don't assume that they're still saying what they were saying when you were studying, because you may well find people there who are actually doing really, really interesting and relevant work, including particularly here at the University of Essex.
I'm really glad that you segued onto the university, because I feel like it's a bit we missed right at the beginning, which is about your time at the University of Essex. I'm interested to know, obviously you started studying economics, and then switched courses, but how did your time at Essex impact you and your career?
Well, I loved it in a way. I mean, I came there almost by default because I applied to non-traditional universities. My top choice was Sussex. I didn't get in there. Essex bobbed up. It was transformative in a number of ways. And one of them was that I was allowed to shift from economics, which, is a fascinating discipline, but at that stage was lousy at understanding what was going on in the wider world. I went there in 67, 68 happened. That was a year that's written about now, but to be part of that was extraordinary because Essex itself blew up, was shut down. One of my wife's previous boyfriends was one of the people who disrupted the university. Now you'll find him in the House of Lords. And one of the things I learned from the sociology that I then segued into was that that's what the system does. It either tries to kill the troublemakers, or it pulls them very close in and wraps them in ermine, or somehow tries to suffocate them. And one of the most important courses I did as part of sociology, it'll sound peculiar, but it was sociology of religion. And I'd grown up in different parts of the world, Northern Ireland, Cyprus, Israel, and so on, where religion was a profound factor in history and in the present. But one of the recommended books there was by Frank Herbert, and many of your podcast followers will have seen the Dune film. And the set book was Dune because it was based on the religion of the Dinka people in Africa. So I read this book, and I found it absolutely transformative because it's fundamentally ecological. It's how do you transform a planet over time from desert to something much more fertile. And for years afterwards, I tried to track down Frank Herbert. He lived in the Pacific Northwest, where I have had then and still have a lot of family. And it took me about 4 years to track him down. I finally, and weirdly, I was flying back from Seattle. He was just about with his wife to fly from London to Seattle. So we had a breakfast together in London. And it was transformative. One of the most extraordinary people that I've ever met. I've met a number of, and worked with in some cases, science fiction writers. And I look back just to that moment where somebody called Andy Tudor, who was running that course, just chose to set that one book. And so I would say that was transformative. But the other thing about Essex was that there were so many windows opening up at the same time, and some of it was music and some of it was drugs. So I took LSD and it lasted 4 years, so I won't go there again. But it was an extraordinary time, and I think I'd previously gone to a very independent, a very liberal boarding school where they'd just given us 40% of our time to do what we wanted. So it was a sort of fairly natural continuation from that. And UCL, when I went there a couple of years after leaving Essex, was so different. I mean, it wasn't campus, it was spread out across London. And I just, that made me appreciate some of the things that we'd had at Essex.
Well, I'm sure it's a very different place now to when you studied there, but I'm sure you'd be very welcome back if you ever want to come back to Essex for a visit.
Well, it's funny, I did come back to pick up an honorary doctorate, and one of the funny things there was being told, well, you did economics and you did sociology, so you could go to either of those schools or departments or whatever, but there's also now environment, there's a business school, there's biology, there's lots of stuff that wasn't there when I was there. So oddly, I picked the biology department of school to do my sort of speech at, because it's one of the disciplines. If I hadn't been forced to drop it because of refusing to cut up frogs, I would have liked to have done really. It's something I regret profoundly in some ways. But that was a very striking, and I took Elaine, my wife, and our daughters to that ceremony. And it was very extraordinary to walk through something that was still recognizable in key ways, but in a different way was profoundly different. So exactly what you said, Alex. I'm just sort of elaborating
on that. So, John, this is a really big question, but I'm going to challenge you to answer it in 2 minutes or less. What to you does as close to perfect future for sustainable corporations look like?
Well, I think one of the things that we've done collectively, and I'm to blame to some degree for this, is we've focused on individual companies. We've also focused on their markets, consumer markets. We've focused on their investors. We've focused on their supply chains. What we have not done enough is to focus on markets, because companies respond to market signals. They're very clever at doing that, but we're not yet adept enough at putting a proper price on carbon that shifts corporate behavior over time. And that's true across the board. So one of the reasons I'm also profoundly regretful that I get back economics is that economics should be addressing those questions of what are the market dynamics that we now need to influence corporate behavior in the way that we want it to be influenced. And there are economists like Mariana Mazzucato and Kate Rayworth who are now sort of coming up with very different models and mindsets in this sort of space. So I think focus on more on markets, and that brings you very quickly to politics and to policy and to government action. And sustained, effective, thoughtful government action is absolutely critical. And if there's one thing that we don't have at the moment, enough of at least, it's that. And partly because we're distracted since Brexit. At least this country has been on this sort of weird journey where it's constant denial of what's happening to it. Somebody described it just yesterday as a slow puncture in the economy. I think it's in places worse than that. But and that's just been an incredible distraction. And we need politicians to pay attention. We need them to focus. We need them to engage and be engaging. And stuff like that is just an idiocy. And the sooner we can get ourselves away from that, I think, the better. Sorry for the political rant. That's probably banned alongside mention of brands, but.
John, we're at Essex. Everyone has political rants.
Good.
Okay, so we're just coming to the end of our time, but I like for our podcast interviews to do a final quick fire round of personal interests, personal questions for you.
Okay.
No, nothing too personal. I'm going to fire some questions at you, and you can give me your first.
You can be as personal as you like. I can always say no.
So, firstly, John, who is your favourite band or musician?
Very hard. Weirdly, the Beach Boys, probably, over time.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Oh, James is supportive of that, yeah.
I bought their first ever album in 1963, I think so.
Oh, fabulous. What was the last film or TV series you watched?
TV series I watch, I may even have referenced it earlier on, Spring Watch. I watch a lot of nature films and Winter Watch and Spring Watch. I just love the way that they bring ordinary people into the world of biology, of wildlife, of ecology, and so on. And yeah, that for me is a good example. But I watch a lot of film and a lot of television.
Fabulous. What meal would you choose to have on your birthday?
Well, my birthday, I think, is on the 23rd of June, so it's fairly an imminent question.
Oh.
I don't know. I mean, I particularly like Asian food. Anything that's rice-based curry or things like that, I like a lot. But yeah, it's a complicated one. I sort of eat what I'm given.
Well, I'm with you on the rice and the curry. I love it. What reading material would you recommend for our audience?
Well, I've touched on it before. I love history. I love biographies and autobiographies. I love fiction. I love children's fiction. But I mentioned science fiction, and I would recommend that people read more of that, including there's a book called the author is Kim Stanley Robinson, and it's either Ministry of or For the Future. And it's it's almost like a novelized MBA thesis, but I'm doing it an injustice, but it's one of the best treatments of what I think it would take and what he thinks it would take to solve the climate crisis.
Fantastic. That sounds really interesting. And lastly, what's the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
That's a really difficult one because I'm always nervous about mentoring because I think there are all sorts of expectations that come with that. But I've had some extraordinary people who I've worked alongside and advised at different stages. I can't think of a particular instance, but I think it's follow your curiosity, do what interests you. If you're going to do something and have the stamina to do it over a considerable period of time, and particularly when a lot of it doesn't go the way you want it to go, you've got to, at some level, be having fun, and you've got to work with people that you like. So I think follow your interests, in my case, has worked very well. Whether there's a book that's just come out called How to Blow Up a Pipeline. And one of the people I knew at Essex ended up in prison for 10 years for trying to blow up British government ministers. So, one has to be a little bit careful about what one recommends.
Husband has studied at Essex.
A bit more science fiction.
Thank you, John. That's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today.
The same, Alex.
It's been fantastic, and I really hope to continue following your work as you go on, and maybe we'll see you back at Essex one day.
I hope so. And we're taking delivery of an electric car. We haven't had a car for 2 years. We're missing it profoundly. We've succumbed and bought a Tesla. So at some stage, are there other charging points at Essex?
There are. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. It's outside the business school.
Okay. Perfect placing, really.
Yeah.
And, expect us next Tuesday. So thank you, Alex and James, very much.
Well, thank you very much indeed, John. It's been an absolute joy listening to that. It was really, really wonderful.
What a great interview, and a really interesting story as well. John has worked with some of the biggest companies and, corporations of massive size, but what he was saying was also relevant to a business of any size, so really useful. He was far too modest as well in promoting his own book, so I'm going to do that for him. His latest in a long line of prolific books is called Green Swans, and if you wanted to, you can read James's in-depth analysis of that book over on the Weave community page, or you can just pick up the book wherever you get your books. So there we have it. What a ride that was. I want to take the time to thank all of our guests from today's show. We really appreciate the time they gave to us and the members of the Weave community for their insights and wisdom. Just time for me to tell you about how you can find more stories, get some support, and build meaningful relationships. Just head over to wearetheweave.co.uk to join our free community. There's far too much in there for me to go into detail about now, but when you join, you will be connected with like-minded business owners who are all supporting each other to a more sustainable and profitable future. And I've been Adam Roxby, the Director of Communications here at The Weave, and I look forward to seeing you in the community. Bye for now.